Everybody loves dads, stories, and the Marine Corps. What could be better than Marine Corps dads who tell stories? Here's another story with veteran storyteller John Sugar Jr., a Marine Corps dad.
Tonight's story is the story of the Labyrinth. Once upon a time, there was a man. He was a king of a city in Greece. And this man had a wife. And one day his wife had a baby. But the baby was cursed. And they went in to look at the baby and they said, "Ah!" Because the baby had the head of a bull. And they said, "That's weird." So they took the baby and they built a great labyrinth around the baby. And it grew up in the labyrinth and became this terrible killing machine. And anybody the king didn't like, he sent into the labyrinth. And the Minotaur would find them and he would beat them up and he would squish them. Well, one day, there was a lad. And this lad's name was Fred. And Fred decided he would go into the labyrinth and beat the Minotaur. So in he went. And the king said, "You will die." And Fred said, "No, I won't." And the king said, "You'll get lost. It's a labyrinth." And a labyrinth is another way to say a maze. And Fred said, "Nope, won't get lost." And so Fred went into the labyrinth. And he could hear in the distance, which is the sound a bull makes when it's breathing. But do you know what Fred did? What? He played out some thread behind him so that he could find his way back out of the labyrinth. You see, Fred was smart. And so Fred went into the labyrinth. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked. He turned a corner. Nope, that's a dead end. Went back. Kept going around the labyrinth until he saw the Minotaur. And it said, "Moo." Because it was the head of a bull, so, he said moo. But it was like a really evil moo. Moo. Maybe it was like mwahahaha. 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 And so the Minotaur, it came at Fred with its head down, and Fred said, "Ah!" And he jumped out of the way, and the Minotaur hit the wall. And the whole wall shook, and a torch fell down and hit the ground. And Fred said, "Oh no, it's big. It's really big. Why didn't they say it was big?" And so he reached out, he grabbed the torch. The Minotaur came at him, and Fred said, "Ah!" And he stabbed the Minotaur in the face with the torch. And so the bull's eyes were on fire. He's like, "Ah! Moo!" And he was scraping his face on the walls, trying to put out his eyeballs. "Moo!" And Fred's running. "Ah!" And the Minotaur managed to put out the fires on his eyeballs. And he went, "Moo!" And he went after Fred. And so he heard it in the labyrinth, and Fred is like, and so he's running, and he's running, and he's running, and he ran through a low doorway. And the Minotaur's like, "Moo!" And the Minotaur can't see very well anymore because his eyeballs caught on fire. And so the Minotaur kept running. "Moo!" Hit the low doorway. Flat in his back. Unconscious. Because rock wall. And Fred said, "I planned that. That was the plan." And so Fred killed the Minotaur. He took out a sword and went, "Yeah!" Stabbed the Minotaur in the heart. And so the Minotaur died. And Fred followed his thread back out of the labyrinth. And the king said, You killed the Minotaur? How?" And Fred said, "That's why you don't mess with Fred. Because Fred'll knock you dead." And it rhymed. And so Fred went out into the world, and he did many other strange and wonderful things. But one of the greatest was the day he slew the Minotaur. Dun, 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 dun.
Another story.
No.
That was Another Story with John Sugar Jr., a Marine Corps dad. Check the show notes for links to his Patreon and website at creativegrumbles.com.